They say grief has stages, but mine feels more like a place, a cold, silent room I can't find the door out of. It's been 6 months since Laura, since the accident on Route 33. 6 months of the house echoing with a silence so profound it screams, of her scent fading from the pillows, of my own reflection becoming a stranger's, hollow-eyed and brittle. The world outside continued, oblivious, while mine had simply stopped, caught in the amber of that rain-slicked night, the shriek of tires, the crunch of metal that I only heard about later from a grim-faced state trooper. I wasn't there. That's a particular kind of hell, the not being there. The replaying of 1,000 what-ifs that all lead back to the same empty space beside me in the bed. The vibrant hues of our life together have leached into a monochrome of survival. Her laughter, the way she'd hum off-key while making coffee, the ridiculous little dance she did when she was excited. These memories are like shards of stained glass, beautiful, but capable of drawing blood with the slightest touch. I walk through rooms that were once ours, now just mine. Her collection of antique teacups gathers dust on the Welsh dresser, a silent reproach. The garden she loved is slowly surrendering to weeds, a mirror of the neglect I feel has overtaken my own soul. Each sunrise is an accusation, another day I have to face without her warmth, her grounding presence. The bills, of course, don't care about grief. They pile up with a cruel, indifferent efficiency, a constant reminder of the life support machines, the specialists, the futile attempts to mend what was irrevocably broken. Laura had good insurance, we thought, but good is a relative term when measured against the voracious appetite of a modern medical catastrophe. The savings we'd painstakingly built, the ones earmarked for that trip to the coast, for fixing the leaky roof, vanished like morning mist. Now the bank sends polite, then less polite letters. The whispers of foreclosure have started to slither under the door. I find myself staring out the window at the same patch of overgrown lawn for hours, the coffee in my mug growing cold, untouched. Food is a chore, sleep a battlefield of recurring nightmares where Laura is always just out of reach, her hand slipping from mine as she's pulled into a darkness I can't penetrate. My friends call, their voices laced with a careful pity I can't stand. Their attempts at normalcy, at pulling me back into the stream of life, feel like an insult to the magnitude of my loss. How can they expect me to talk about the weather, about local politics, when the very air I breathe feels thinner, colder since she left it? The weight of it all is crushing. The grief, the guilt, the suffocating debt. I'm a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of what used to be. The man I was, the one who planned a future with Laura, who believed in simple happiness, he died on Route 33 with her. What's left is this husk, this shell, animated by a grim necessity. I need to work. I need to do something, anything, to keep the wolves from the door, to hold on to this house, this last tangible piece of her, even if living in it feels like a slow, self-inflicted torture. It was in this state of numb desperation, scrolling through job listings that all seemed to require a level of enthusiasm I could no longer muster, that I saw it. The ad was stark, almost an afterthought tucked away at the bottom of a local classifieds page. Night patrol, remote route, vehicle provided, austere conditions, serious inquiries only. No company name, just a post office box. It felt as desolate and uninviting as my own existence, and perhaps that's what drew me in. There was no pretense of cheer, no promise of a brighter future, just a grim acknowledgement of a need. The anemic light of a late autumn afternoon filtered through the grimy window of my study, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, indifferent star in the galaxy of my despair. I remember tracing the outline of a coffee stain on the desk, a relic from a morning when Laura was still here, her laughter echoing from the kitchen. The thought of picking up the phone, the carefully constructed identity of James Miller, grieving widower, was fracturing, dissolving under the immense pressure of the supernatural. The numbness that had characterized my grief was being replaced by a raw, almost feral intensity. If Laura was truly out there, in some form, connected to that road, then my previous passive sorrow was an insult. My old strategies, avoidance, denial, the slow march of days, were useless. I was no longer just a man mourning his wife. I was a man standing on the precipice of an abyss, and the abyss was staring back, wearing her face. The world as I knew it had ended, not once, but twice. And the second ending was proving to be far more terrible than the first. The days following the storm were a blur of agitated research and sleepless nights. The image of Laura's spectral face, trapped in that phantom car, was a brand on my soul, a torment that fueled a desperate, almost manic need for answers. I couldn't simply continue, couldn't just endure another shift on that cursed road without understanding, or at least attempting to understand, the nature of the abyss I was confronting. My small, grief-stricken world had been violently expanded to include horrors I hadn't known could exist, and the old maps were useless. I needed a new chart, a new way to navigate this terrifying, uncharted territory. My first port of call was the internet, that vast, chaotic repository of human knowledge and folklore. I scoured local West Virginia forums, historical society pages, and obscure paranormal blogs, searching for any mention of Route 33, Ridgeback Security Solutions, or Silas Blackwood. No, Mr. Harold Grayson, I corrected myself. The name change a trivial detail in the face of the larger, more terrifying picture. Ridgeback Security was a ghost. No official website, no public records beyond a P.O. Box address. Grayson himself was equally elusive, a phantom in the digital ether. But Route 33, that was a different story. Tucked away in the dusty corners of forgotten message boards, under threads titled Appalachian Haunts or High Strangeness in the Mountain State, I found them. Scattered, anecdotal accounts of unsettling experiences on that very stretch of road. Tales of phantom headlights, of sudden, inexplicable cold spots, of disembodied voices whispering from the dense tree line. Most were dismissed as local legends, campfire stories, the overactive imaginations of late-night travelers. But to me, they resonated with a chilling, undeniable truth. One particular post, buried deep within a long dormant thread from over a decade ago, caught my eye. It was from a user named Road-Weary Soul, who claimed to have worked for a shadowy outfit patrolling a certain mountain route in Pendleton County. He spoke of strange rules, of sightings he couldn't explain, of a pervasive sense of being watched. He mentioned the oppressive atmosphere between two specific mile markers, the radio interference, the feeling that the road itself was somehow alive. Then, a crucial detail. He wrote of rumors, passed down from older locals, of a watcher's log, a journal kept by someone who had patrolled the road generations ago, supposedly hidden near the old lightning-struck oak at Marker 19. Marker 19, the place where I'd heard the humming lullaby, where the forest felt particularly sentient. A jolt, not a fear this time, but of a desperate, nascent hope shot through me. Could it be real? A tangible clue in this nightmare of intangibles? The thought was a lifeline. The next evening, armed with a sturdy flashlight and a small shovel I'd found rusting in the shed, I arrived for my shift early, well before the oppressive darkness fully descended. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled the Explorer over near the designated marker. The familiar, gnarled shape of a massive oak, its upper branches indeed blackened and splintered, looming just beyond the ditch. So, I picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was gravelly, impatient, giving me an address for an informal discussion the next day. It wasn't an interview, he'd stressed, just a chat. The address was for a disused gas station on the outskirts of Franklin, miles from anywhere, a place most people probably forgot even existed. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach, a faint, long-dormant instinct of self-preservation trying to make itself heard above the roar of my apathy. But what did I have to lose? The worst had already happened. Or so I believed, standing on the precipice of something I couldn't yet name, something that would make the familiar landscape of my grief seem almost comforting by comparison. Was it fate, or just the blind stumbling of a broken man, that led me towards that desolate road, towards the encroaching darkness that awaited? I couldn't know then, just as I couldn't know that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again, and some silences are filled with more than just absence. The gas station looked like it had been surrendering to the elements for decades, a skeletal relic of a forgotten highway era. Paint peeled from the rusted pumps like sunburnt skin, and the sign, once promising fuel and sundries, now hung askew, creaking a mournful rhythm in the biting wind. The office was a small cinder block annex at the back, its single window opaque with grime. A lone, flickering fluorescent tube inside cast a sickly yellow pallor on the man who rose to greet me. He was tall, gaunt, with a face like a weathered map of hard roads and long nights. Mr. Harold Grayson. His handshake was brief, his grip surprisingly strong, cool to the touch. The interior of the annex was as Spartan and unwelcoming as its exterior. A single metal desk, two mismatched chairs, and a lingering scent of stale coffee, and something else. Something metallic, almost like old blood. Though I dismissed it as my imagination running wild. Grayson didn't waste time on pleasantries. He gestured for me to sit, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, never quite meeting mine, instead seeming to focus on a point just over my shoulder. He asked no questions about my past, my skills, my reasons for wanting such a solitary, unglamorous job. It was as if he already knew, or simply didn't care. "The work is straightforward," he began, his voice a low, monotonous drone that seemed to absorb the very light in the room. "You patrol a designated stretch of Route 33, dusk till dawn. You observe, you report anything unusual. Ridgeback Security Solutions handles sensitive contracts. This is one of them." He slid a thin typewritten sheet of paper across the desk. "Your operational parameters. Read them, understand them, adhere to them. Non-negotiable." The finality in his tone brooked no argument. The list was short, stark, and utterly bizarre. My eyes scanned the numbered points, each one a small, cold pebble dropping into the pit of my stomach. 1. Maintain designated speed limits. Deviations must be logged with explicit reasoning. 2. Radio checks mandatory at hourly intervals, precisely on the hour. No exceptions. 3. All observed vehicular incidents, regardless of severity, are to be reported to dispatch before any personal intervention. Await instruction. 4. No unauthorized stops between mile marker 17 and 22 between the hours of 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. This is critical. My unease grew with each word. Then I reached the 5th rule, the one printed in slightly bolder type, almost as if the typewriter key had been struck with more force. 5. During your patrol, you will inevitably encounter other vehicles. Count them. The first, the second, but the third car. James, you do not look at the third car. Under any circumstances, avert your gaze. Focus on the dashboard, the tree line, your own hands on the wheel. Do not make direct visual contact with the third vehicle or its occupants. This is not a suggestion. It is a fundamental requirement of your employment. The air in the small room suddenly felt colder, heavier. I looked up at Grayson, searching his impassive face for some flicker of explanation, some hint that this was an elaborate, tasteless joke. There was none. His gaze remained distant, his expression unreadable. "The third car?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. What happens if I do?" A silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, broken only by the incessant hum of the faulty fluorescent light above. Grayson's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. "You will adhere to the rules, Mr. Miller. That is all you need to concern yourself with. The vehicle, a maintained Ford Explorer, is outside. Keys are on the desk. Your first shift is tonight." My mind reeled. This was madness. A job patrolling a lonely stretch of mountain road, governed by rules that sounded like they'd been lifted from a child's nightmare. Every rational instinct screamed at me to get up, to walk out, to run as far and as fast as I could from this strange man and his stranger proposition. But then the image of Laura's face, pale and still in the hospital bed, flashed before my eyes, followed by the stark red of the overdue notices piling up on the kitchen counter. Desperation, I was learning, had a way of silencing even the loudest alarms. "There's one more," Grayson added, his voice pulling me back from the brink. He pointed to a final, almost apologetic-looking rule at the bottom of the page. 6. If you hear distinct vocalizations, cries for help, whispers, singing, emanating from the dense woods bordering the route, you are to increase the volume of the provided vehicle's radio to a comfortable level and maintain your speed. Do not investigate. Do not slow down. Report upon completion of your sector pass. He finally met my eyes then, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something akin to warning, or perhaps even pity in their desolate depths. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I should have refused. I should have thanked him for his time and walked away, back into the bleak but at least comprehensible landscape of my grief. But the truth was, a part of me, the part that had died with Laura, didn't much care what happened anymore. And the part that was still stubbornly alive knew that I needed this. I needed the money, the distraction, perhaps even the sheer stark weirdness of it all to jolt me out of the stupor I'd been in. "I understand," I heard myself say, the words feeling alien in my own mouth. Grayson simply nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. He slid the keys across the desk. "Your call sign is Ridgeback 7. Dispatch will be expecting your first check-in at 1900 hours. And just like that, I had a job that felt less like an occupation and more like a descent. The old Ford Explorer rumbled beneath me, its engine a dull thrum that vibrated through the worn seat and up my spine. It smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke, damp upholstery, and something else, a faint, unidentifiable chemical tang that pricked at my nostrils. The dashboard lights cast a dim, greenish glow over the interior, illuminating the crack in the windshield that spread like a frozen spiderweb. Route 33 unspooled before me, a ribbon of decaying asphalt swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness of the Monongahela National Forest. Towering trees pressed in on either side, their branches skeletal fingers clawing at the bruised twilight sky. This was my domain now, this lonely stretch of nowhere. My first few nights were a masterclass in heightened unease. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig from the impenetrable woods sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The rules, memorized and mentally recited like a grim catechism, played on a loop in my head. Maintain speed, radio checks on the hour, report incidents before intervention, no stops between 17 and 22 from 02000 to 02015. And of course, the one that haunted every shadow, every approaching flicker of light. Do not look at the third car. The effort of consciously not looking, of counting approaching headlights, 1, 2, then deliberately focusing on the glowing numbers of the digital clock or the worn texture of the steering wheel as the third set of lights swept past, was exhausting. The forest itself felt alive, watchful. Patches of unnaturally cold air would envelop the explorer for a few seconds, raising gooseflesh on my arms despite the heater blasting on high. Sometimes I'd catch fleeting movements in my peripheral vision, dark shapes flitting between the trees, too quick to identify, always gone when I risked a sideways glance. The radio, as per Grayson's instructions for Rule 6, was my constant companion, usually tuned to a crackling AM station playing mournful country songs from a bygone era. But there were moments, especially in the deeper stretches of the forest, when even that would dissolve into a hiss of static, leaving me alone with the unsettling symphony of the night. One night, deep into my shift, as I passed the old, weather-beaten sign for mile marker 19, I heard it, a sound that chilled me to the bone despite the stuffy air in the cab. It was faint at first, almost lost in the drone of the tires on the asphalt, but it grew clearer. A woman's voice humming a lullaby. It was a sweet, sorrowful tune, and it seemed to be coming from just beyond the tree line to my right. My hand instinctively went to the radio dial, cranking up the volume of a scratchy broadcast about crop prices until the humming was drowned out. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and focused on maintaining my speed, the words of Rule 6 a frantic prayer in my mind. Do not investigate, do not slow down. The stretch between mile marker 17 and 22 became a source of particular dread. As the digital clock on the dashboard ticked towards 2 a.m., a knot of anxiety would tighten in my chest. Precisely as the numbers changed, a strange quiet would fall over the forest, the usual chorus of crickets and unseen creatures ceasing abruptly. The air would grow heavy, pregnant, as if holding its breath. During those 15 minutes, as I drove at a meticulously constant speed, I often felt it, an intense, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being scrutinized by something unseen, something malevolent, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. The Explorer's radio would invariably fill with a rushing, roaring static during this passage, no matter the station. Reporting these anomalies to dispatch, a disembodied voice that identified itself only by a call sign, was an exercise in futility. Ridgeback 7 to dispatch, be advised, audible vocalizations, female, suspected east of Route 33, vicinity mile marker 19. Adhered to protocol. The response was always the same, flat and devoid of emotion. Dispatch copies Ridgeback 7, continue patrol. No questions, no surprise, no concern. It was as if these occurrences were not just expected, but mundane, a routine part of the job description that hadn't made it onto Grayson's typewritten sheet. The solitude began to wear on me, fraying the edges of my composure. Hours spent alone in the dark, with only the strange rules and the encroaching forest for company, provided fertile ground for my grief to fester and morph. Laura's face would appear in the shadows between the trees, her eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. The humming I'd heard, had it sounded a little like her? I'd shake my head, trying to dispel the thought, to separate the genuine horrors of the road from the phantoms conjured by my own broken mind. But the line between them was becoming increasingly, terrifyingly blurred. Each pair of approaching headlights became a miniature ordeal. 1, 2, then the deliberate aversion of my gaze, the forced focus on some mundane detail inside the cab, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was so terrible about the third car? What unseen horror did it carry through the night? The not knowing was a special kind of torture, a constant, low-level thrum of anxiety that underscored every moment of my shift. I found myself developing a morbid curiosity, a perverse desire to steal just a glance, to understand the nature of the threat I was so stringently ordered to avoid. And so the nights passed, each one a repetition of the last, yet each subtly different, adding another layer to the suffocating blanket of dread. The road, Route 33, was no longer just a stretch of asphalt. It was becoming a character in my nightly drama, a silent, brooding entity with its own secrets, its own malevolent rhythms. I was its reluctant audience, its captive observer, bound by a set of rules I didn't understand, in service to a purpose I couldn't fathom, hurtling through the darkness towards an unknown and increasingly unwelcome destination. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless, steely downpour that turned Route 33 into a slick, black mirror reflecting the fractured moonlight. Visibility was atrocious, the wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear, each sweep revealing only another feet of treacherous, glistening asphalt. It was the kind of night that amplified every fear, every lurking shadow, making the familiar unease of the patrol sharpen into a more acute sense of foreboding. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my eyes straining against the deluge. This was my 4th week, and the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a weary, almost numb acceptance of the road's inherent strangeness. I was tired, the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from chronic sleep deprivation and unrelenting stress. My thoughts, usually a whirlwind of Laura, the bills, and Grayson's cryptic rules, felt sluggish, coated in the same damp chill that permeated the explorer's cab. A set of headlights pierced the gloom ahead, approaching slowly. 1. I registered it almost automatically, my internal counter clicking over. Another followed a few moments later, its beams diffused by the curtain of rain. 2. My body tensed, the familiar ritual of aversion beginning, but my mind was a fraction of a second too slow, still mired in its fatigue-induced fog. The third set of lights appeared, emerging from the storm-lashed darkness with an unsettling swiftness. Before I could fully execute the practiced maneuver, the deliberate turn of my head, the forced focus on the dashboard's dim glow, my gaze snagged on them. It was only for a heartbeat, a sliver of a second stolen from the relentless flow of time, but it was enough. These weren't ordinary headlights. Instead of a focused beam, they emitted a diffuse, internal luminescence, like dying embers fanned by a spectral wind, casting an eerie, pulsating red glow that seemed to throb in time with some unheard, unhealthy rhythm. The vehicle itself was a blur in the downpour, its shape indistinct, but the silhouette of the driver, it was wrong, terribly wrong. not hunched over a wheel, but elongated, impossibly tall even when seated, its head tilted at an angle that defied natural posture. It was more a suggestion of a form than a clearly defined figure, a smudge of deeper black against the already Stygian backdrop of the night. Yet the wrongness of it, the utter alienness of its proportions, seared itself into my brain. I wrenched my eyes away, a strangled gasp tearing from my throat, my heart lurching as if trying to escape my ribs. A wave of intense nausea washed over me, so potent I had to fight the urge to retch. My head exploded in a sudden blinding pain, a sharp stabbing agony behind my eyes that made the world swim. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, trying to keep the Explorer on the road, my vision blurring at the edges. The red glow of those unholy lights seemed to burn on my retinas, an afterimage of pure distilled dread. It was as if looking, even for that fraction of a second, had violated some fundamental law of this place, unleashing a physical consequence. As the phantom vehicle, for surely it could be nothing of this earth, swept past, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. There was nothing. The rain-swept road behind me was empty, stretching back into the oppressive darkness. It hadn't continued its journey, hadn't rounded a bend or disappeared over a rise. It had simply ceased to be. As if the physical sickness eventually subsided, leaving me clammy and trembling, the phantom pain in my head dulled to a persistent throb. But the mental imprint remained, stark and undeniable. The third car wasn't just a vehicle to be avoided out of some arbitrary caution. It was other. It was a manifestation, a messenger, a shard of some incomprehensible reality that bled through onto this lonely stretch of road under the cover of darkness. And I, in my fatigue and carelessness, had peered behind the curtain, however briefly. I fumbled for the radio handset, my fingers clumsy. "Ridgeback 7 to dispatch," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Observed anomaly, third vehicle, brief visual contact." The silence on the other end stretched for an eternity, each second amplifying my terror. Had I broken an unbreakable rule? Would Grayson appear out of the darkness to mete out some unimaginable punishment? Finally, the familiar, flat voice of dispatch crackled back. "Dispatch copies, Ridgeback 7. State your condition." There was no inflection, no surprise, but was that a new, almost imperceptible note of interest? Or was that just my frayed nerves? "Condition stable," I lied, though I felt anything but. "Proceeding with patrol." "Acknowledged, Ridgeback 7. Maintain schedule." And that was it. No reprimand, no further questions. But the exchange, or lack thereof, was more terrifying than any rebuke. It implied that such an event, such a breach, was perhaps not entirely unexpected. It implied that whatever lurked out here on Route 33 was known, at least in part, to those who employed me to watch over it. And it confirmed, with chilling certainty, that I was involved in something far more sinister and profound than simply earning a paycheck. The road had shown me a sliver of its true face, and it was a visage of pure, unadulterated nightmare. Sleep, already a fragile commodity, became a battleground I rarely won. The brief, horrifying glimpse of the third car, its unearthly red glow and the distorted silhouette within, replayed itself endlessly behind my eyelids. But it wasn't just that image that haunted me. It began to merge, to bleed into the already tormented landscape of my grief. In my nightmares, it was Laura in the third car. Not the vibrant, laughing Laura of my memories, but a pale, spectral version, her eyes wide with an unspeakable sorrow, her hand pressed against the glass as if trying to reach me, her lips forming words I couldn't hear over the roar of an unseen storm. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the sheets tangled around my legs, the phantom scent of her perfume mixed with the metallic tang I associated with Grayson's office filling my nostrils. The house, my supposed sanctuary, felt more like a trap, its familiar walls closing in, the silence amplifying the cacophony in my head. The carefully constructed dam I'd built against the flood of my sorrow was cracking, and the horrors of Route 33 were seeping through, poisoning the well of my memories, twisting what was precious into something monstrous. The days blurred into a gray miasma of exhaustion and dread. I moved through them like an automaton, the world outside the windows of the explorer muted and distant. The need for money, the initial desperate driver for taking this godforsaken job, was still there, a dull ache in the background. But a new, more insidious motivation was taking root, a morbid, terrified compulsion to understand. What was happening on that road? And the question that gnawed at me relentlessly, was it somehow connected to Laura? Was her presence in my nightmares a manifestation of my own fractured psyche? Or was the road itself calling to her, to me, through her? I cornered Grayson a few days later, finding him in the same bleak annex, poring over a stack of what looked like topographical maps under the jaundiced light. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "The third car," I said, my voice raw. "I saw it. What is it? What the hell is going on out there, Grayson?" For a long moment, he didn't look up, his finger tracing a contour line on the map. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were as cold and remote as a winter moon. "Your report was noted, Mr. Miller," he stated, his tone flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. "You were instructed to avert your gaze. You failed to do so. The consequences, I trust, were illustrative." There was no anger, no reprimand, just a chillingly detached acknowledgement. "The nature of our observations is not your concern. Your function is to patrol, to report, to adhere to the parameters. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" I almost shouted, the frustration and fear coiling in my gut erupting. "People don't just see things like that, Grayson. That thing, it wasn't natural. And these rules, this secrecy, what are you protecting? Or what are you protecting us from?" He regarded me with a look that I could only describe as profound weariness, as if he'd had this conversation 1,000 times before, with 1,000 other desperate, frightened men. "Some roads, Mr. Miller," he said softly, his voice a dry rustle like autumn leaves, "lead to places not found on any map. Some phenomena defy easy categorization. Your attempts to rationalize will only lead to distress." His calm, his utter refusal to engage with the horror I'd witnessed was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. It was the calm of someone who had not only seen the abyss, but had perhaps made his home on its very edge. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a chilling realization that I was utterly alone in this. Grayson wasn't an ally. He was a gatekeeper, a custodian of secrets too dark or too complex for ordinary minds to comprehend. Ridgeback Security Solutions wasn't a security company. It was something else, something that operated in the shadowy borderlands of reality. The encounter left me shaken, The fragile hope of finding answers, of finding some external validation for what I was experiencing, shattered. I was trapped. The financial noose was tightening, but more than that, the road itself had sunk its hooks into me. The nightmares intensified. Laura's spectral face became a nightly visitor, her silent sorrow a heavier burden than any debt. I started to question my own sanity. Was I hallucinating? Was the grief, the stress, the unnatural solitude finally fracturing my mind? Or was the road, with its strange energies and its third-car sentinel, somehow amplifying my pain, using my deepest loss as a conduit for its own unsettling manifestations? The line between James Miller, grieving widower, and Ridgeback 7, haunted night patroller, was dissolving. I was becoming a creature of the night, my rhythms dictated by the setting of the sun and the cryptic rules of a job I increasingly suspected was less about observation and more about something else? Sacrifice? Containment? I didn't know. All I knew was that the comforting certainties of my old life were gone, replaced by a creeping dread and a gnawing, terrifying suspicion that the road knew me, knew my sorrow, and was slowly, inexorably drawing me deeper into its dark, unfathomable heart. The storm hit just after midnight, a furious, biblical deluge that lashed Route 33 with a ferocity I hadn't witnessed since that night. Wind howled through the passes, making the towering pines sway like tormented giants, their branches groaning under the strain. Rain hammered against the explorer's roof with the intensity of a drum solo played by a madman, reducing visibility to mere feet. The road, already a treacherous ribbon of asphalt, became a slick, unpredictable serpent, daring me to lose control. Every nerve in my body was taut, stretched to its breaking point. This was not a night for subtle horrors. This was a night for raw, elemental fear. I was crawling along, my eyes straining to pick out the faded white line that marked the edge of the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The radio was used. 2 sets of headlights sliced through the downpour in quick succession, their passage almost a relief, a brief reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this maelstrom. 1, 2. The count was automatic, ingrained. But as the second car vanished into the tempest behind me, a different kind of dread, cold and specific, began to uncoil in my stomach. The third car. On a night like this, with visibility near zero, the chances of averting my gaze in time, of adhering to Grayson's sacrosanct rule, felt perilously slim. I braced myself, my gaze fixed on the dashboard, willing my peripheral vision to betray nothing. It appeared suddenly, not gradually emerging from the gloom, but materializing out of the sheeting rain as if conjured by the storm itself. There was no time to look away, no chance to enact the practiced aversion. My eyes, wide with the strain of navigating the hazardous conditions, locked onto it. The car was ancient, a rusted hulk that looked like it had been dredged from the bottom of a forgotten lake, its paint blistered and peeling, its chrome pitted and dull. There was no discernible driver, no silhouette against the eerie faint glow that emanated from within its cab. But the passenger seat was occupied. My breath hitched, a painful, tearing sensation in my chest. It was Laura. Not the sorrowful, spectral Laura of my nightmares, but something far more chilling. Her skin was a ghastly, luminous white, like polished bone, her hair plastered to her skull by an unseen moisture. Her eyes were wide, empty, reflecting the faint internal light of the phantom car with a dead, vacant sheen. But they were fixed on me, unblinking, accusing. As the derelict vehicle drew level with the Explorer, moving with an unnatural, silent glide that defied the raging storm, her lips, blue and thin, parted. No sound came out, but I heard it. Not with my ears, but deep within the recesses of my mind, a psychic scream of utter desolation, of an agony that transcended human comprehension. It was the sound of the crash, the shriek of tearing metal, the shattering of glass, the final desperate intake of breath, all amplified, distorted, funneled directly into my consciousness. The smell of gasoline, hot oil, and something else, something coppery and sickeningly sweet, filled the Explorer, so potent I gagged, my stomach heaving. The world outside the windshield dissolved into a swirling vortex of rain, light, and pure, undiluted terror. The vision, if that's what it was, lasted only seconds, but it stretched into an eternity of horror. Then, as silently and abruptly as it had appeared, the phantom car and its ghastly occupant were gone, swallowed by the storm as if they had never been. I slammed on the brakes, the Explorer skidding precariously on the slick asphalt, coming to a halt mere inches from the treacherous unseen shoulder. I threw open the door and stumbled out into the driving rain, a raw animalistic cry tearing from my throat as I retched violently onto the muddy verge, the taste of bile and terror coating my tongue. The illusion of control, the fragile pretense that I could navigate this haunted road by simply following a set of bizarre rules, was shattered. This was not a game of avoidance. This was a direct, personal assault. The road, or whatever entity held sway over it, had used my deepest love, my most profound grief, and twisted it into a weapon. It had shown me a vision of Laura not as a comforting spirit, but as a horrifying effigy, a tormented echo trapped in a nightmare realm. There was no safety here, no sanctuary, not even in the supposed sanctity of rules. Trembling, soaked to the bone, I climbed back into the Explorer. The storm raged on, indifferent to my private apocalypse. But something inside me had broken. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my gut, but it was now overlaid with a chilling, desperate clarity. The road wasn't just a place of strange occurrences, it was a place of active, malevolent intent. And it seemed to have chosen me, James Miller, widower and reluctant patroller, as the focus. The aftermath of the storm, and the horrifying vision of Laura it had delivered, left me in a state of profound shock, a hollowed-out shell of a man. The remaining hours of my shift passed in a blur of numb autopilot, my hands moving on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in the recurring loop of that ghastly, spectral face, those empty, accusing eyes. The rain eventually subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean, glistening under the first hesitant rays of a bruised dawn. But inside me, the storm still raged, a tempest of grief, terror, and a dawning, terrible understanding. When I finally pulled into the designated endpoint of my patrol, the sun was a pale, watery disk on the horizon. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of facing the empty house, of confronting the silence that would now be filled with the echoes of that silent mental scream, was unbearable. Instead, I drove to a deserted scenic overlook, a place Laura and I had once visited on a bright autumn day, a place now tainted, like everything else, by the long shadow of her absence and the fresh horror of the night. I sat there for hours, the engine off, the chill of the morning seeping into my bones, staring out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the Appalachians. The system I had been operating under, the fragile framework of rules, reports, and the illusion of a mere job, had utterly collapsed. This wasn't about patrolling a road for ridgeback security solutions. This wasn't about observing anomalies and logging them for some unseen bureaucratic purpose. This was something else entirely. The road, Route 33, was not just a stretch of asphalt. It was a conduit, a wound in the fabric of reality, a place where the veil between worlds was not just thin, but shredded. And I, through some cruel twist of fate or some deliberate, unseen design, had been stationed at its bleeding edge. Grayson's impassive face floated in my mind. His cryptic warnings, his detached pronouncements, now took on a new, more sinister meaning. He knew. He had to know the true nature of this place, the true cost of patrolling this haunted highway. The rules weren't for safety. They were, perhaps, a crude attempt at containment, or maybe even a form of ritual, a way of placating or navigating the forces that held sway here. And my looking at the third car, my direct confrontation with its terrifying passenger, had broken some unspoken compact, had exposed me, or perhaps marked me, in a way I couldn't yet comprehend. The initial motivation for taking this job, the crushing weight of debt, the desperate need to keep Laura's memory alive through the preservation of our home, seemed almost trivial now, a mundane concern from a life that no longer felt real. What did money matter in the face of such existential horror? What was a house, even one filled with precious memories, when confronted with the possibility that the spirit of my beloved wife was trapped, tormented, in some nightmarish limbo accessible via a god-forsaken stretch of West Virginia blacktop? A new, terrible thought began to take root, a cold seed of dread blossoming in the desolate landscape of my mind. Was this why I had been chosen? Was my grief, my raw, unhealed wound, a beacon? Did the entities of Route 33 feed on such sorrow? Or were they drawn to it, like moths to a flame, or perhaps, more accurately, like predators to a weakened prey? The personalized nature of the horror, Laura's face, the echoes of her accident, was too specific, too cruel, to be mere coincidence. I could quit. The thought was a fleeting, seductive whisper. I could walk away, leave Franklin, leave West Virginia, try to outrun the darkness that had attached itself to me. But a deeper, more primal instinct told me it wouldn't be that easy. I had seen too much. I had been seen. And a terrifying, insidious part of me, a part I barely recognized, felt a grim, almost magnetic pull back towards that road. Not out of desire, but out of a dawning, horrifying sense of obligation, or perhaps destiny. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The forest was unnervingly silent, as if holding its breath, aware of my transgression. I pushed through the dense undergrowth, the beam of my flashlight cutting a nervous swath through the gloom. It took almost an hour of frantic searching, my hands raw and bleeding from thorns and rough bark, before I found it. Tucked deep within a hollow formed by the tree's ancient exposed roots, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly rotted away, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, brittle, and stained with mildew, but the spidery, faded ink within was, for the most part, still legible. I carried it back to the explorer as if it were a holy relic, my hands trembling. Settling into the driver's seat, the dim dome light casting a pale glow, I opened it. The first entry was dated 1958. The writer, a man named Josiah Heaton, introduced himself as a night watchman for a private concern, tasked with observing the nocturnal passages on this very road. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was not just folklore. This was a first-hand account, a voice from the past echoing my own terrifying present. Josiah's entries detailed experiences eerily similar to mine: the inexplicable cold, the disembodied sounds, the overwhelming sense of being scrutinized. He too wrote of the strange rules, though subtly different in their wording, passed down by his own taciturn supervisor. And then he wrote of the third procession, as he called it, the vehicle that was not to be looked upon, which he described as a herald of the thin places, a sign that the veil between worlds was particularly fragile. He theorized that the road itself, ancient and carved through a land steeped in older, forgotten energies, acted as a conduit, a pathway for things that did not belong to the waking world. This was no longer just my private horror, my grief-fueled delusion. This was a documented phenomenon, a secret history of Route 33, passed down through generations of unwilling sentinels. The discovery of Josiah Heaton's journal didn't lessen the terror, but it subtly shifted its nature. I was no longer stumbling blindly in the dark. I had a map, however crude and terrifying, drawn by a hand that had trembled with the same fears that now gripped me. And with that map came a dawning, desperate resolve. If this road was a pathway, if the third car was a herald, then perhaps understanding its nature, rather than merely avoiding it, was the key. Not to escape, necessarily, but to something else, to confront. The words of Josiah Heaton, penned over half a century ago in that little decaying journal, became my nightly obsession. I devoured his entries during the long, quiet stretches of my patrol, the explorer's dome light casting a small circle of illumination in the vast, oppressive darkness of Route 33. His careful, almost academic descriptions of the phenomena, his meticulous record of dates, times, and the subtle shifts in the road's atmosphere painted a picture of a man grappling with the same profound, terrifying questions that now consumed me. He wasn't just a watchman, he was a reluctant scholar of the abyss. Josiah wrote of his own struggles with fear, with the temptation to abandon his post, but also of a growing, almost scientific curiosity. He didn't just avoid the third procession, he studied its periphery, noting the changes in temperature, the behavior of wildlife, or lack thereof, the quiet of the silence that preceded and followed its passage. He theorized that the road, in certain lunar cycles or atmospheric conditions, didn't just allow passage from other realms, but perhaps also to them, or at least offered a glimpse across the threshold. He spoke of it as a liminal space, a term that resonated deep within me, capturing the unsettling in-betweenness I felt every time I drove that haunted stretch. What struck me most profoundly, however, were Josiah's later entries. After years of passive observation and fearful avoidance, he described a shift in his own approach. He began to wonder if the entities, the travelers, as he sometimes called them, were inherently malevolent, or if their terrifying aspect was simply a byproduct of their alien nature, a consequence of mortal minds trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. He wrote of small, hesitant attempts to not communicate precisely, but to acknowledge, to project a sense of neutrality, even respect, rather than just raw fear. He detailed an instance where, instead of averting his gaze from an approaching anomaly, he was less specific about its form than the third car. He had simply stopped his vehicle, closed his eyes, and focused on an image of peace. The anomaly, he wrote, had passed without the usual accompanying wave of dread. This was a revelation. All my interactions with the road's strangeness, all of Grayson's rules, were predicated on avoidance, on fear, on not engaging. But Josiah suggested another path, a terrifying, almost unthinkable one, a path of cautious, respectful observation, perhaps even a form of acceptance. He hadn't found definitive answers, his journal entries growing more fragmented and philosophical towards the end, but he had found a way to coexist with the mystery, to transform his terror into a kind of odd, solemn vigilance. He was trying to understand the language of the road, not just cower from its pronouncements. The vision of Laura, her ghastly, spectral face in that phantom car, still burned in my memory. But now, filtered through Josiah's experiences, a new, desperate thought began to form. What if my looking, my raw, terrified gaze had contributed to the horror of that manifestation? What if the road, or whatever intelligence guided these apparitions, had reflected my own fear and grief back at me, magnified and distorted? Josiah wrote of the road being a mirror to the soul of the watcher. If my soul was a maelstrom of sorrow and terror, what else could I expect to see? A wild, reckless idea began to take shape. A plan so contrary to Grayson's rigid dictates, so fraught with peril that my sane mind recoiled. But I was no longer entirely sane. Or perhaps I was finally sane enough to realize that passive endurance was a slower, more agonizing form of destruction. I would not simply avert my gaze from the next third car. I would not flinch. I would look. Not with the panicked, accidental glance of before, but with intent, with a desperate, focused desire to see, to understand, to perhaps even connect. If Laura, or some echo of her, was truly tied to this road, to this phenomenon, then I owed it to her, and to myself, to face it, whatever the cost. The decision, once made, settled a strange, almost unnerving calm over me. The fear was still there, a cold serpent coiled in my gut, but it was now accompanied by a sliver of purpose, a fragile resolve. I spent the next few shifts preparing myself mentally, rereading Josiah's words, trying to absorb his quiet courage. I thought of Laura, not the horrifying apparition, but the real Laura, her warmth, her strength, her unwavering belief in facing challenges head-on. I would try to meet the unknown with a fraction of that spirit. I didn't know what I would see. I didn't know if I would survive it, mentally or physically. But the alternative, a lifetime of cowering in the dark, haunted by unanswered questions and tormented by spectral visions born of my own fear, was no longer an option. Josiah Heaton had looked into the eyes of the mystery, and if not conquered it, had at least found a way to stand his ground. Now it was my turn. The road awaited. The third car would come, and this time James Miller, Ridgeback 7, would be watching. The night was preternaturally still, the air cold and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. A sliver of a crescent moon hung low in the inky sky, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced and writhed as I drove. My hands were clammy on the wheel, my breath shallow, but a core of resolve, cold and hard as riverstone, had settled within. I didn't have to wait long. The first set of headlights appeared around a distant bend, their beams cutting through the darkness like probing fingers. 1. My heart began to pound, a heavy, insistent drum against my ribs. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to emulate the calm Josiah had described striving for. The second car followed soon after, a nondescript sedan that hurried past as if eager to escape the oppressive solitude of Route 33. 2. This was it. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle drop in temperature, the almost audible hush that fell over the woods, as if all of nature was holding its breath in anticipation. Then it emerged. Not with a roar of an engine, not with the glare of conventional headlights, but as a slow, silent coalescing of the darkness itself. The third car. It was different this time, less overtly menacing than the rusted hulk that had carried Laura's horrifying specter, yet infinitely more profound in its strangeness. It seemed to glide rather than roll, a long, low silhouette that shimmered at the edges, as if woven from moonlight and shadow. A soft internal luminescence pulsed from within, not the angry red of before, but a gentle, ethereal blue, like the heart of a distant nebula. I did not avert my gaze. I met it head-on, my eyes wide, my entire being focused on this impossible apparition. As it drew closer, the details, or lack thereof, became more apparent. There was no discernible driver, no occupants in the conventional sense. The interior seemed to be filled with the same soft blue light, swirling and shifting like a captive aurora. My fear was immense, a primal scream trapped in my throat, but beneath it, a strange, almost transcendent curiosity held me rapt. This was not a vehicle of this world. It was a vessel, a messenger, a piece of the unknown made manifest. As the third car drew level with my explorer, the world around me began to dissolve. The familiar lines of the road, the dark sentinels of the trees, the very fabric of the night seemed to ripple and distort, as if I were looking through water or into a heat haze. The blue light from the phantom vehicle intensified, expanding, engulfing my vision. There was no sound, yet I felt a profound, resonant hum deep within my bones, a vibration that seemed to shake the very atoms of my being. It wasn't painful, not like the searing agony from my previous accidental glimpse, but it was overwhelmingly powerful, stripping away the layers of my mundane perception. And then I felt her, Laura. Not as a visual apparition, not as a spectral horror, but as a pure, undeniable presence. It was a wave of emotion that washed over me, so potent it brought tears to my eyes. A torrent of love, of sorrow, of an aching, profound regret. But beneath it all, a gentle, pervasive sense of peace. It was as if her essence, her truest self, was communicating directly with mine, bypassing the crude mechanics of sight and sound. There was no accusation, no torment, only a vast, encompassing understanding, a farewell that was also a reassurance. The memories we shared, the love we had, it was all there, distilled into a single, luminous moment of connection. I saw, not with my eyes, but with some deeper internal sense, the road as Josiah had described it, a liminal space, a river of souls, a pathway between what is and what might be. The third car was a ferryman, a psychopomp, gliding silently through the veils. And Laura was on her journey. The horrifying vision I'd had in the storm, I realized with a sudden painful clarity, had been a reflection of my own tormented grief, my own inability to let go, amplified and distorted by the road's strange energies. This was different. This was release. The intensity of the experience. I don't know how long I sat there, the explorer idling by the side of the road. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. But as the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a profound sense of exhaustion, deeper than any I had ever known, settled over me. It was an exhaustion not just of the body, but of the soul. I had faced the absolute, had peered into the heart of the mystery that haunted Route 33, and I had, in some small, incomprehensible way, found a measure of peace within it. The road had taken so much, but in that moment of terrible, beautiful clarity, it had also given something back, a final, poignant goodbye. The sun was a raw, bleeding wound on the horizon when I finally guided the explorer back towards the designated endpoint of my patrol. Every muscle ached, my mind felt scoured clean, yet paradoxically, a strange lucidity permeated my thoughts. The world looked different, sharper, its colors more vibrant, its shadows deeper. It was as if the encounter with the third car, with that cascade of pure, unmediated emotion and otherworldly light, had stripped away a layer of perceptual dullness I hadn't even known was there. The ordinary now seemed extraordinary, imbued with a fragile, transient beauty. As I pulled into the deserted gravel lot that served as our pre-dawn rendezvous point, I saw him, Mr. Harold Grayson, standing beside his own nondescript sedan, a dark silhouette against the rapidly brightening sky. He never met me here. Our interactions were usually confined to the bleak annex or the impersonal crackle of the radio. His presence now felt significant, a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. He didn't speak as I cut the engine and climbed out of the Explorer, my legs unsteady beneath me. He simply watched me, his gaze, usually so remote, now holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity? Respect? Or perhaps just the weary recognition of a fellow traveler who had navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of the path. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost lost in the crisp morning air. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of my continued existence, perhaps even my survival. I merely nodded, too drained for words. The experience of the night felt too vast, too sacred, or perhaps too terrifyingly intimate to be easily translated into human speech. How could I describe the dissolution of reality, the silent communion with what I believed to be Laura's departing essence, the feeling of my soul being stretched to its very limits? Grayson seemed to understand. He didn't press for a report, didn't ask about anomalies or adherence to protocol. He just stood there, a gaunt, somber sentinel, as the last vestiges of night surrendered to the dawn. "The road," he said, after a long silence, his eyes fixed on the distant, tree-lined ribbon of Route 33, "chooses its own. Some are merely observers passing through. Others become part of its story, woven into its fabric. You've seen beyond the veil, haven't you, James?" The use of my first name was unexpected, a subtle crack in his armor of professional detachment. "I saw something," I managed, my voice raspy. "I think I saw her, Laura, saying goodbye." A fresh wave of grief, gentler this time, washed over me, but it was a clean sorrow, unburdened by the jagged edges of guilt and unresolved torment that had plagued me for so long. Grayson nodded slowly, a gesture of profound, almost melancholy understanding. Such passages are rare, and they exact a toll, but they can also offer a clarity that few are privileged or cursed to find. He turned to face me then, and in the growing light I could see the deep lines etched into his face, the shadows in his eyes that spoke of countless nights spent staring into the same abyss I had just glimpsed. "Ridgeback Security Solutions," he said, a faint, ironic smile touching his lips. "We are custodians, watchers at the threshold. The rules are not arbitrary, Mr. Miller. They are the result of generations of experience, of trial and error, of loss. They are an attempt to navigate the currents, to minimize the collateral damage." "So, you knew?" I asked, a new understanding dawning. "You knew what was out there? What could happen?" "We know that the road is a place of unusual properties," Grayson conceded. "We know that it interacts with those who travel it, especially those who carry heavy burdens or possess certain sensitivities. Your predecessor, Josiah Heaton, he understood some of it. His journals are illuminating, are they not?" My surprise must have shown on my face. "You knew about the journal?" "Little remains truly hidden from those who have walked this path long enough, James." He didn't fire me. He didn't reprimand me for my deliberate transgression of the most fundamental rule. Instead, there was a subtle shift in our dynamic, an unspoken acknowledgement that I was no longer just an employee, a replaceable cog in his mysterious machine. I had crossed a threshold, not just on the road, but within myself. The encounter had changed me, had irrevocably altered my perception of life, of death, of the very nature of reality. The grief for Laura was still a part of me, a permanent ache in my soul, but it no longer defined me in its entirety. It was now interwoven with a profound, almost terrifying sense of awe and a strange, unexpected sense of peace. "The road will continue to call," Grayson said, his voice a soft premonition. "What you do with that call now, that is your decision. But you are no longer merely patrolling, Mr. Miller. You are bearing witness." He gave a curt nod, then turned and walked to his car, leaving me alone with the rising sun, the silent, watchful mountains, and the lingering echo of a love that had transcended even the veil of death. The world was still broken, still filled with sorrow, but for the first time in a long time, it also felt possible. I still patrol Route 33. The checks from Ridgeback Security Solutions continue to arrive, as enigmatic and impersonal as ever, but the money is no longer my primary motivation, nor is it the desperate anchor it once was. Something shifted in me that night, after the encounter with the ethereal blue light and the profound, silent farewell from Laura. The road, once a symbol of my deepest trauma, a place of dread and malevolent energy, has become something else. It is still a place of potent mystery, of unsettling beauty and undeniable power, but my relationship with it has transformed. I am no longer its victim, nor merely its reluctant observer. I am, as Grayson suggested, a witness. The rules still exist, a framework for navigating the inexplicable. I adhere to them, not out of blind obedience or fear of reprimand, but with a newfound understanding of their deeper purpose, a fragile bulwark against forces that defy easy comprehension, a set of guidelines for treading carefully on sacred and perilous ground. The third car still passes, a silent, shimmering enigma gliding through the darkness. I no longer avert my gaze with terror, nor do I seek to engage it with the desperate intensity of that one transformative night. Instead, I acknowledge its passage with a quiet, internal nod, a moment of solemn respect for the mysteries it represents, for the journeys it facilitates between worlds seen and unseen. The oppressive weight of my grief for Laura has lightened. not vanished, but transmuted into something more bearable, a poignant ache that coexists with a profound sense of her enduring presence. The horrifying spectral visions no longer plague my sleep. Instead, when she comes to me in dreams, it is as the vibrant, laughing woman I loved, her eyes bright, her spirit free. I understand now that the road did not create her torment. It merely reflected my own. And, in its own inscrutable way, it offered a path towards healing, a brutal but ultimately cathartic confrontation with the raw essence of loss and love. Mr. Harold Grayson remains a distant, enigmatic figure, our interactions infrequent and brief. But there is an unspoken understanding between us now, the quiet camaraderie of two men who have stared into the same abyss and returned, changed. He occasionally leaves old, leather-bound books in the Explorer for me, treatises on folklore, local histories, philosophical explorations of liminal spaces. Never with a note, just a silent offering of knowledge, a breadcrumb trail into the labyrinthine mysteries we both serve, in our own ways. I suspect he sees in me a successor, or at least a kindred spirit, another soul tethered to the strange rhythms of Route 33. The forest that lines the road no longer feels solely menacing. It is still wild, still secretive, but now I also perceive a deep, ancient wisdom within its shadowed depths, a silent witness to countless passages, both mundane and extraordinary. The whispers I sometimes hear on the wind, the fleeting glimpses of movement in the periphery, no longer fill me with a paralyzing dread. They are simply part of the road's complex tapestry, threads of the unknown woven into the familiar. I have learned to listen, not with my ears, but with a deeper, more intuitive sense, to the subtle language of this place. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know the ultimate purpose of Ridgeback Security Solutions, or the true extent of the phenomena that manifest on this lonely stretch of mountain highway. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be fully unraveled, but rather to be experienced, to be held in a state of perpetual awe and cautious respect. My life is irrevocably intertwined with Route 33 now. It has taken much from me, but it has also given me a strange, unexpected gift, a profound understanding of the thinness of the veil, a glimpse into the vast, interconnected mystery of existence. Sometimes, on the stillest nights, when the moon is full and the air is electric with unseen energies, I feel a sense of peace out here, a solitude that is not empty but full of echoes, of whispers, of the silent passage of souls. I am James Miller, a man who lost his love on this road, and in doing so found a different, stranger kind of life. I am Ridgeback 7, a custodian of the threshold, a guardian of the unseen. And as I drive through the darkness, counting the cars, bearing witness to the third, I know that my journey, like the road itself, stretches on into an unknown and perhaps unknowable horizon. The silence is no longer just absence. It is pregnant with possibility.